Today we're going to be taking a look at the roster moves that teams have made from Stage 1 to Stage 2. We're not going to take a look at China because I don't know enough about the players that they're bringing in, if I'm being honest. So we'll take a look at the other three regions and talk about what they are doing. And so here we go. We're going to kick off with Boom, who I'm going to give a B+. They haven't made any changes, as you can see just here. And for them, they are an Ascension team. And again, for the Ascension teams in this video, they're going to be graded maybe a little bit more harshly or, you know, more favorably in certain areas, because for Ascension teams it just matters more, right? Because if they make champs, they get to stay in tier 1. If they make the playoffs, they get to play in Ascension again, and if they don't make playoffs, they're just out of tier 1 Valorant. You know, Stage 2 really matters for them, and I think for a team like Boom, you know, they did pretty well in Stage 1, right? But they ultimately didn't make it to Toronto. It's a bit of a risk to not make any changes, but I can understand why they didn't as well. Moving on to DFM, and I'm going to give them a D, because really, do I think that DFM making no changes as well, that they're going to make champs, and ultimately that's what it's all about, of course? No, I don't, if I'm being honest. So I'm going to give them a D. DRX, I think, have made these changes. This is the thing. I think they've got rid of Estrella and Bane. They definitely have added Flicker and Flashback. We don't fully know who's actually playing on this team, but I'm going to give that a B+. Again, I think that DRX, this is fine. I think that these could very well be upgrades, right? Flashback we saw was very good in moments as well, so could be upgrades, but who knows what's going on at DRX, but they should at least be pretty good. Gen.G haven't made any changes. I'm going to give them a B+ as well. Now, this could be higher, and I think for most of you probably would have maybe expected it to be higher, because who were they realistically going to change? But I think if you're Gen.G, like, there is a world where maybe you think, like, we could actually win champs here, like, with the form that we showed during Toronto. And so maybe with just one change, you know, maybe they could have pushed them over the edge. But I'm not too dissatisfied with them not doing anything global. Getting rid of Kelly S and Patrick Hu for Ban and Yeoman, and I think that these should overall be upgrades. I think these are the kinds of players that Global needed, to be honest, just kind of like solid tier 1 players. So I'm going to give them an A- for that. For Nongshim, they've just brought in RB. Again, not fully sure who's not playing here for Nongshim. I'm going to give them a B for that, because again, this is an Ascension team. Like, will Nongshim definitely make at least the playoffs? I'm not actually sure about that in a very competitive Pacific. So, and I also don't know who's actually playing. So, you know, that's also bringing in a bit of uncertainty as well. Paper Rex obviously did nothing. They're getting an A. They won Masters Toronto. RRQ also did nothing. And again, this one, I've given an A-. I think that it makes some sense for RRQ to not do anything. But I do also think, you know, there could have been potentially room if they really wanted to. T1, I've got rid of Sylvan, brought in DH. I've given that a B+, because like, could that be an upgrade? Yes, but I'm not, you know, fully sure. Sylvan was pretty good at his role. Obviously, we've seen that team literally win a tournament together with Sylvan on it. So, you know that you have tournament winning potential there, but I can understand it. That's why they've got a B+. Talon haven't done anything, which again I think makes some sense, because I think they are a team that can compete and can make it to champs with the roster that they currently have. Team Secret have made some changes in Jesse, Jeremy, and 2G going, with Kelly S, Zespi, and Nizzy coming in. I've given this a B because whilst I agree that, you know, changes did need to be made, I'm not 100% convinced that this will be enough to make Team Secret great. Shooter for 1010 for Zeta, I actually quite like. I'm going for an A- here. I think that this should pretty much just be a straight upgrade, and I think that Zeta, you know, when they were a decent, you know, an okay team, you know, during Stage 1, so, you know, by making a decent upgrade, you know, that could turn them into a team that potentially could compete overall. Moving on to EMEA. And we start with Apex, who got rid of Flora and Governor, of course, for Ollie, Zera, and Penny. And I'm giving that a C, because I just don't believe that it's going to be enough. BBL didn't make any changes. And that, I think, makes sense, again, for a team that is doing pretty well. I think, again, you could maybe make the case for BBL that, hey, you're very close. Like, you're on the cusp of making these tournaments, like, all the time. You know, maybe one upgrade would really push you over the edge. But, you know, if you don't think that the upgrade is there, then that's fine. I gave him a B+. Fnatic didn't make any changes, obviously, makes sense. Came second in Toronto. Foot didn't make any changes either. This one I think makes less sense. I've given them a B-, because I do think that this might have been the time for Foot, right? Particularly when you look at someone like Comeback is going to an EMEA team, right? Or in general, that BBL Pacific team with, you know, very good players on it. Could Foot have maybe, you know, picked up one of those players? Mates, another Ascension team that has made some pretty significant changes. And for this, I've given them an A+. Because I think that for Mates, like, this is the level of, like, okay, we are an Ascension team, we need to go big, and I think this is going pretty big, right? I think they've kept the 2 players that I think were their best performers, who were, you know, doing very well. We're gonna, you know, really ship house here and try and really make a go of this, and I think that's absolutely fair enough. I like this. That's why they're giving them an A+. Giants got rid of Runner, Thomasy, and Purpo, bring in Ara. Obviously, Ara and Flickless have already played somewhat, but, you know, for the majority of stage 1, you know, they weren't playing, and Grubinho coming in as well. This I've given a B. You know, again, do I think that this is going to propel Giants necessarily, you know, to making champs? Not really. Karmine Core didn't do anything. I've given that a B as well. Obviously, I know that they're doing well, you know, recently. You know, they seem to have come into a bit of form and are doing okay, but, you know, I do still have some concerns, like, long term, will that be the case? And again, this is a team that, you know, champs is in Paris, you need to be making it. Am I sure that they're gonna make it? Not really. So that's why I've given them a B. Koi, I've got rid of Shadow, Solkas, and Grubinho, and brought in Monster, Batty G, and Attack. Now, I've talked about this before, that I just like the players that they've brought in. You know, Batty G and Monster played on Ascend, and I've always been an Attack fan, ever since he destroyed Ascend. So I've given them an A- here. Again, because I think that these are players. I mean, Attack I just think is a tier 1 player, but I think Monster and Batty G are both players as well that it's kind of shocking they haven't been in tier 1. Navi, Koala Noob for Alexic, another player that I like Alexic there, so I've given them a B+ here again, Navi. With Navi, it's a bit tough, right? Because you are looking at, like, what would you change if you were on Navi? And I think that this one makes sense, but again, is it going to be necessarily enough to propel them to champs? Not quite sure, but again, it's a change I think that makes sense. Team Heretics didn't make any changes. I'm giving them an A. I know that some of you would say, oh, Team Heretics do need to make changes, but I am not on that bandwagon. I still just believe that Team Heretics, they're just going through a bit of a funk, and they will work their way out of it given a bit of time. Team Liquid minus Serial plus Trex, I've given them an A as well. Now I did want to give them an A+ here, but there is, like, the potential that this does go wrong. There could be some potential where, you know, this does, like, upset the team chemistry or whatever, right? And maybe this actually makes them worse somehow. There is some worlds where that is the case. However, I don't think that that will necessarily be the case. And I like that Team Liquid are going, hey, we've got a pretty good team here. So I like, you know, getting aggressive and bringing in, you know, a good player like Trex. I think that makes sense. And then Vitality, getting rid of Safe and Sivo for Unfake and Kovac. And I think I'm going to give them a B+. Again, Vitality are a tough one to rate here overall. I think that there are 2 sides to this, right? One, you've kind of undone becoming a super team, right? And so now you're just kind of a regular team with some very good players on it. But I think that, on the other hand, that might make the team make more sense. If Durka and Les can pop off and kind of carry them, which is what they are expected to do now, and the rest can kind of be a good support structure around that, then maybe this team makes more sense, and honestly, maybe they are a lot better. Moving on to Americas, we'll start with 100 Thieves, who have made no changes, and I've given them a B- for that. I think similar to 100 Thieves, it's like Foot, right? I'm going to consider 100 Thieves and Foot kind of the same, right? As teams that last year, you know, both did make internationals, you know, and did do okay. And then this year, they've had moments, you know, they've had some good moments, they've had some good maps, but they just haven't really been that consistent. And I think, again, is it possible that other teams are just going to overtake you or be a bit better than you? Yeah, maybe. 2G got rid of Zap and Askia, brought in Price and Spike. Obviously, Spike was always going to come in. I've given them a B- because whilst I do think that this does make the team more competitive and better, again, do I believe that this will save them? And unfortunately for 2G, they're in the spot where G2 have already made champs. So in their specific case, like, they're going to have to beat G2 at champs to guarantee their place. Whilst the changes make sense, it can only go so far. Cloud9 haven't made any changes. I'm going to give them a B. Not making changes, again, makes sense because they have shown enough to warrant not making changes, but at the same time, could they have made changes and make me, you know, made me feel like, ooh, maybe they've got a chance here? Like, maybe. EG also made no changes. I've given them a B because similar to Cloud9, they have showed something. I think 100 Thieves and Foot are a little bit different because you know, EG and Cloud9, I think, have shown a bit more this year overall. Furia have made a ton of changes, of course, and I've given this a C+, because again, do I really fully believe in this for this year and making champs? No, not really. Like, long term, this might be good, right? But again, your goal should be always to make champs, really. Like, that's what you're here for, right? So that's what I'm grading you on. G2 haven't made any changes. I've given that an A, because what realistically would G2 gonna do? Crew have got rid of Adverso and bringing in Dante Juice. That was revealed pretty recently. And I've given that a B+. like, on one hand, I think that this might go crazy, and crew, like, might be very good after this change. On the other hand, it does make me worry a bit. Melser is now going to be IGLing again. Like, the roles might be a little bit mixed up and muddled up in terms of what they're going to play. So there are some concerns that I have, which is why I've given them B+, but I do also recognize that this could just go crazy. Lev, got rid of Demon 1 and Rossi, bring in Sato and Okeanos. I've given that a B. Again, like, I think these are changes that probably needed to be made, so that's like the good side of it. But again, do I truly believe that these are like that roster now is going to be good enough to beat all these other fairly decent Americas rosters? You know, that's why I've given them a B, basically. Loud, get rid of DG Zin and Tui's, bring in Verti and Robbie BK. I've given this a C because I just think there's too many questions. Robbie BK, though, I just, you know, it seems like we're upsetting the apple cart a bit too much, right? We're kind of coming in a different language, I think. MIBR, didn't make any changes. I've given them a B+. Now, despite the fact that they made Toronto, obviously it was pretty disastrous. I'm a bit worried that this team might start to slide a bit. Obviously, like, not making changes does make sense because, you know, you haven't had much time to even make changes. So it does make sense to not make changes, but I'm a little bit worried for them. So I'm giving them a B+. NRG, -FNS plus Scuba. I've given that an A- because I think it should just be an upgrade for them, to be honest, and should just help them be better. Again, my concern would be the IGLing with Ethan. Will that work? Don't know, but we'll see. And then finally, Sentinels didn't do anything, and I've given that an A as well. Now, I know that some of you might think, like, Sen actually might, you know, could they make a change? Could, you know, could they change Zelsis or something like that? This is a team that will make champs. Now, when it comes to winning champs, I think it's more about, like, you just have to hope that when you get to champs, you know, the players are feeling it. Zekken's on, you know, white hot form, and the, you know, the map pool is good for them, and they found some roles that make sense for them. Like, that is what I would be doing if I was Sen for stage 2. So that is Sen, and that is all of the teams. So I know that some of you will disagree with me heavily on some of them, and that's absolutely fine, because some of this will be very wrong, right? I think in general, most teams make changes that make at least some sense on paper. Obviously, we're not inside the team, so it's a bit difficult to assess, but thank you for watching, and have a nice day.